Have you ever looked at someone you deeply love and wondered, why don't they feel loved by me? You show up, you work hard, you stay loyal, you fix problems, you sacrifice your time, and yet somehow, the emotional distance grows. The conversations feel colder, the affection fades. You begin to think, maybe we're just not compatible anymore. But what if the issue isn't compatibility? What if the issue is translation? What if you have been speaking love fluently your entire life, but in the wrong language? That is the radical yet disarmingly simple idea at the heart of The 5 Love Languages, by Gary Chapman. And while the concept may sound almost too neat at first glance, its implications are profound. This isn't just a book about romance. It's about emotional survival. It's about why relationships that start with fireworks often drift into quiet frustration. It's about how two well-intentioned people can both feel unloved at the same time. Over the next moment, we are going to go far beyond the surface explanation of the 5 love languages. We'll explore the psychology behind emotional needs, the structure of romantic decline, the mechanics of long-term intimacy, the practical application of each language, and the deeper philosophy of choosing love even when feelings fluctuate. By the end, you won't just understand the 5 love languages, you'll see relationships through an entirely new lens. Let's begin at the foundation. Gary Chapman is a marriage counselor and pastor who spent decades sitting across from couples in crisis. Over and over, he encountered the same haunting statement, "I just don't feel loved anymore." What struck him was that these couples were not necessarily abusive, negligent, or indifferent. Many were trying. They were simply missing each other emotionally. Chapman began noticing patterns. Certain spouses lit up when they received affirming words. Others responded deeply to physical closeness. Some cared most about practical help. Others valued quality time. Slowly, he formed a hypothesis. People have primary emotional dialects of love, and when love is expressed in a language different from the one a person naturally receives, it doesn't register. The central thesis of the book is simple but powerful. Every person has a primary love language. When their partner consistently speaks that language, their emotional love tank fills. When it's neglected, resentment, loneliness, and emotional withdrawal begin to grow. What makes this idea different from generic relationship advice is its structure. It gives vocabulary to something previously vague. Instead of saying, "We're drifting apart," you can say, "I feel disconnected because my primary love language isn't being expressed." That shift from emotion to explanation changes everything. Chapman identifies 5 primary love languages: words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. While everyone appreciates all 5 in some degree, most people have 1 or 2 that dominate. Let's explore them in depth. The first love language is words of affirmation. For some individuals, verbal expression carries immense emotional weight. Encouragement, appreciation, gratitude, and praise are not superficial compliments, they are oxygen. But this isn't about flattery. In fact, insincere praise often backfires. Words of affirmation work because they validate identity. When someone says, "I admire how patient you were today," they are affirming character. When they say, "I appreciate how hard you work for us," they are acknowledging sacrifice. Chapman tells stories of spouses who felt invisible despite years of marriage. Once their partner began intentionally expressing appreciation, the emotional climate changed dramatically. Why? Because for someone whose primary love language is affirmation, silence feels like neglect. There's also a deeper psychological dimension here. Human beings construct self-worth partly through reflection. We see ourselves more clearly through the way others speak about us. Affirming words reinforce positive identity loops. However, there is nuance. Words of affirmation must be specific. Vague praise doesn't penetrate deeply. "Your great lacks power. I respect the way you handled that conflict," calmly builds trust. Another critical insight is the difference between praise and encouragement. Praise recognizes what someone has done. Encouragement fuels what they could become. Encouragement requires belief in the other person's potential. And that belief is profoundly bonding. But what happens when this language is absent? Criticism becomes devastating. A harsh word doesn't just sting, it feels like rejection of identity. For these individuals, verbal negativity cuts deeper than physical distance. Now let's shift to the second love language, quality time. Quality time is not proximity, it is presence. You can sit beside someone for hours and not speak their language, if your attention is fragmented. For people whose primary language is quality time, the gift is undivided attention. Eye contact, listening, shared experiences, meaningful conversation. Chapman distinguishes between quality conversation and quality activities. Quality conversation involves empathy-driven dialogue. It requires listening not to respond, but to understand. This is particularly powerful because many conflicts arise not from disagreement, but from emotional dismissal. Quality activities, on the other hand, create shared memory. The activity itself is secondary. The emotional message is, I value being with you. The psychological depth here is significant. Humans bond through synchronized attention. When two people focus on the same experience together, neural connections strengthen. Shared attention reinforces attachment. However, a common misunderstanding is assuming that simply being busy together counts. It does not. If devices dominate, or conversation is shallow, the love tank remains low. For someone with this love language, consistent distraction feels like indifference. And indifference erodes intimacy faster than anger. The third love language is receiving gifts. At first glance, this one is often misunderstood as materialistic. But Chapman is careful to clarify. The gift itself is not about price, it is about symbolism. A gift represents thought. It is a tangible symbol that someone was remembered. Anthropologically, gift-giving has always been a bonding ritual across cultures. The physical object becomes a placeholder for emotional meaning. For individuals whose primary love language is receiving gifts, the absence of small tokens can feel like forgetfulness. And forgetfulness can translate into emotional insignificance. What matters is intentionality. A handwritten note, a flower picked on the way home, a small item tied to an inside joke. These gestures communicate, you are on my mind. There is also something profound about the physical permanence of gifts. Words fade. Time passes. But a gift remains. It anchors memory. Next is acts of service. This language says, actions speak louder than words. For someone who values acts of service, love is expressed through helpful effort. Doing chores, running errands, fixing problems, lightening burdens. The underlying emotional message is, I care enough to make your life easier. What's powerful about this language is that it demands sacrifice of energy. It requires initiative. It often requires doing something that may not be personally enjoyable. Acts of service also reveal something about stress and cognitive load. When someone feels overwhelmed, practical help reduces mental strain. That relief translates into emotional warmth. However, forced service breeds resentment. If someone feels manipulated into serving, the act loses authenticity. Love languages are powerful only when freely chosen. Finally, we arrive at physical touch. This includes more than sexual intimacy. It includes holding hands, hugs, sitting close, gentle contact. For some individuals, physical closeness creates emotional safety. Neuroscience supports this deeply. Physical touch releases oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. It reduces stress hormones. It increases feelings of trust. For those whose primary language is physical touch, absence of contact can feel like emotional abandonment. A lack of affection may be interpreted as rejection. But touch must be consensual and context-sensitive. Its power lies in mutual comfort. Now that we've explored each language individually, we need to examine how they interact. One of the most important insights Chapman shares is that people tend to express love in the language they prefer to receive. This creates a translation problem. If your language is acts of service, you may constantly do helpful tasks for your partner. But if their language is words of affirmation, they may still feel unloved. Both partners may be giving, but in dialects the other doesn't understand. This misalignment explains why couples often say, "I do so much for you," while the other responds, "But I don't feel close to you." Chapman introduces the metaphor of the love tank. When the tank is full, couples are resilient. Conflicts feel manageable. But when the tank is empty, small irritations escalate quickly. He also addresses a crucial stage in relationships, the infatuation phase. Early romance often feels effortless because emotional intensity temporarily masks language differences. But infatuation fades. When it does, intentional love must replace automatic passion. This is where choice becomes central. Love, Chapman argues, is not merely a feeling. It is a decision to meet the emotional needs of another person consistently. And this is perhaps the most transformational idea in the entire book. Feelings fluctuate, but disciplined, intentional expression sustains intimacy. Let's go deeper into the psychological philosophy beneath this framework. At its core, the 5 love languages is about recognition. It asserts that every human being carries a deep need to feel valued. That need does not disappear with adulthood. It evolves. When emotional needs are unmet, people develop coping behaviors. Some withdraw. Some criticize. Some seek affirmation elsewhere. Many relationship breakdowns are not caused by lack of love, but by prolonged emotional starvation. Chapman's framework empowers couples to become students of each other. It shifts the mindset from "why aren't you loving me correctly?" to "how do you best experience love?" That shift requires humility. It also requires emotional maturity. Speaking someone else's language may not come naturally, but effort communicates commitment. There is also a profound principle of intentional generosity embedded in this system. Love languages challenge self-centered expression. They force you to ask, "What makes you feel secure?" Not "What feels convenient for me?" Over time, consistently speaking a partner's primary language builds emotional equity. That equity becomes protective during conflict. Now, it's important to acknowledge limitations. Some critics argue that the framework oversimplifies human complexity, and it's true that people are multifaceted. Emotional needs evolve. Cultural backgrounds influence expression. Trauma shapes receptivity. Additionally, love languages do not excuse harmful behavior. No amount of acts of service compensates for disrespect. No words of affirmation override betrayal. Furthermore, mismatched expectations may still require deeper communication beyond language alignment. However, these limitations do not diminish the model's usefulness. Instead, they highlight that it is a tool, not a cure. When applied thoughtfully, the framework fosters empathy. And perhaps its greatest strength is accessibility. It provides a shared vocabulary couples can use immediately. As we begin to close, let's return to the central message. Imagine a world where instead of assuming your partner should just know how to love you, you taught them your language gently. Imagine choosing to learn theirs with equal care. Imagine arguments softened because emotional needs were met consistently. Imagine resentment shrinking because appreciation was expressed intentionally. The 5 love languages ultimately teaches that lasting love is less about chemistry and more about consistency. It reminds us that love is not proven by intensity, but by intentionality, and perhaps most importantly, it reframes romance as a daily practice rather than a spontaneous event. The real power of this book lies not in identifying your love language. It lies in speaking someone else's, especially when it requires effort. Because, when you choose to love someone in the way they understand most deeply, you are saying something extraordinary. I see you. I value you. I am willing to grow for you. And in a world where many relationships fade quietly from emotional neglect, That willingness may be the most powerful expression of love of all. So the question isn't simply, what is your love language? The deeper question is, are you willing to learn another person's and speak it fluently, even when it's not your own? Because when two people commit to that journey, love stops being accidental. It becomes intentional. And intentional love endures.